Hello and welcome back. Today we will discuss the rise of nationalism, a new source of power in modern politics. Starting in the early 19th century, the new concepts of nation and nationalism provided the countries of Europe and America with a renewed sense of unity and strength. Nationalism would inspire the creation of new countries and solidify the power of old ones. In the century that followed, nationalism spread to all corners of the earth, and today it is perhaps the most influential ideology of the modern world. So, what is nationalism? To understand this modern ideology, we must first understand the concept of nation. The modern definition of a nation is a group of people united by a shared language, culture, and customs, usually resulting from a shared history or set of experiences. This new definition emerged as a result of the French Revolution. The removal from power and eventual beheading of King Louis XVI left France without a reason for being. In other words, prior to the revolution, individuals identified themselves with a king that ruled the land on which they lived. Hence the word kingdom, land of the king. One was a subject of the king. However, with the king gone, there arose the need to find a new identifying element, a new connecting thread that united all people living in a country. The concept of the nation then appeared. The nation then were all the people that shared the same language, history, and culture. Their desire to form part of a single, united country came to be known as national self-determination. This is the justification for the existence of modern countries, in fact. We can divide nationalism into two different types. Ethnic nationalism is grounded in the belief that ethnic, religious, or racial identity defines membership in the nation. Civic nationalism, on the other hand, is based on the belief that loyalty to a common set of political goals or ideals defines membership in the nation. As I mentioned earlier, the French Revolution gave birth to modern nationalism. As French armies spread throughout Europe with Napoleon at their head, they took with them the new concept of French nationalism. The people that they conquered were exposed to these ideas, inspiring in them to search for their Volksgeist, a German word that means national spirit. Academics and artists alike began studying the origins of their national language, history, music, and literature. Within this context, nationalism was a revolutionary doctrine. It was influenced by the radical changes of the French Revolution and was brought to the rest of Europe by the revolution-inspired armies of Napoleon. In the areas occupied by the French army, nationalism first made itself visible in inspiring resistance to the Napoleonic occupations. After the Congress of Vienna in 1815 and the re-establishment of traditional conservative absolutist monarchical rule throughout Europe, nationalism continued to inspire the revolutionary aspirations of national self-determination and representative government, and as such the demand for political change. Out with the king and in with the people. The unification of Italy in 1870 was heavily inspired by the new nationalist notions of self-determination. Italy as a concept had existed since the period of the Roman Empire, 2,000 years before. However, Italy as a political reality, as a country, had never existed. In the mid-19th century, nationalist sentiment funneled into a cultural and political movement called the Risorgimento, or resurgence, finally led to the uniting of all Italians under one state. There were a number of heroes of the Risorgimento, but three really stand out: Giuseppe Mazzini, Count Cavillo di Cavour, and Giuseppe Garibaldi. Mazzini became the intellectual of Italian unification. He argued in favor of strengthening the aspirations of Italians by uniting them into one nation and one nation state. As a writer, he supported Italian unification by, in his own words, the pen and the sword. This meant convincing people and politicians with nationalist writing in newspapers and pamphlets, but also by making use of violence if necessary. Count Camillo de Cavour, the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Piedmont, a small country comprised by the region of Piedmont in the northwest corner of present-day Italy, and the island of Sardinia, was inspired by Mazzini's words. He dreamed of a strong, united Italy led by the King of Piedmont. He also realized, however, that the larger countries of Europe, France, Austria, and Prussia, would have little interest in allowing the Italian kingdoms to unite into a larger, stronger, and potentially more threatening nation-state. Austria would be affected the most, since it controlled much of the northern Italian regions. Rather than confront the larger and stronger countries, Cavour opted to divide their opinion by secretly negotiating with France its support against Austria. In exchange for Nice and Savoy, Piedmont received support from France in any military conflict against Austria. This sly move allowed Piedmont to conquer the northern half of the Italian peninsula by 1860, declaring the creation of the new country of Italy. The lower half of the Italian peninsula joined the new Italy later in 1860, when Giuseppe Garibaldi, who you see here, a mercenary funded by Cavour, led a group of volunteers called the Red Shirts, mainly because they wore red shirts, to the island of Sicily to incite popular uprisings against the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Only 1,000 strong initially, the Red Shirts were soon joined by peasants along the way, inspired by Garibaldi's nationalistic rhetoric, allowing them to easily take the Sicilian capital of Palermo. They then moved on to the Italian mainland to take Naples. Cavour's troops met them there and formalized the unification of Italy. The Papal States surrounding the city of Rome remained independent. They were actually ruled by the Pope until 1870, when it too was absorbed into the Italian state. Here you have an image of the Red Shirts landing in Sicily. Notice Garibaldi in the center, holding up the new Italian flag and raising his sword. He exemplifies Mazzini's romanticized vision of a nationalist hero. And here you have monuments erected in honor of the heroes of Italian unification. On the left you have Garibaldi in a square in the northern Italian city of Genoa, and on the left you have another statue of Garibaldi, this one in New York City. Monuments serve as strong reminders of national accomplishments and help to maintain nationalist pride. They're a critical element of this new modern ideology. Nationalism also inspired the unification of another Central European country, Germany. As you can see on this map, prior to its unification in 1871, Germany was made up of many small states, some kingdoms, some principalities. Prussia, the country in the tan color, was clearly the dominant Germanic state, both in size and military power. German nationalism grew out of French occupation in the early 19th century. During the Restoration, German nationalist sentiment grew, especially among the rising middle class and college students, inspired by the ideas of political liberalism and frustrated with the limited representation they had in government. Pressure to reform turned to revolution in 1848, when activists took to the streets, gaining control of many important cities. The activists forced the collapse of governments for a short time, but they ultimately proved to be too disjointed to resist the reestablishment of the status quo by the supporters of the monarchies. In the end, the highly idealistic approach of the nationalist revolutionaries in 1848 failed to unify the many German countries. Unification would occur 30 years later, in 1871, but it would not be a result of nationalist inspiration. Instead, it was a result of sly political maneuvering and military aggression by Otto von Bismarck, the chief Prussian minister. Bismarck wanted to strengthen Prussia's position in Central Europe. He was not a German nationalist. However, he understood the strong following nationalist ideas had inspired in Prussia and other German states. He used this to his advantage by convincing many Germans to join Prussia in forming a greater German state. Bismarck also understood that unification would require much negotiation and the use of violence. As he clearly stated in a speech, the key questions of the day will not be decided by speeches or majority decisions. That was the grade of 1848-1849, but by blood and iron. Realpolitik became Bismarck's signature method. Its definition is the practical application of power to attain state goals, without regard for theory, idealism, or moral considerations. In other words, Bismarck took a practical approach to negotiation and war. He was willing to bend and manipulate ideology, such as nationalist rhetoric, to accomplish the ultimate and very practical objective, the unification of Germany and the strengthening of Prussia. Bismarck negotiated swiftly and fought hard with the countries that were opposed to the creation of a united Germany. He fought 3 quick and very successful wars against Denmark, Austria, and France between 1864 and 1870. Each time he allied with one country against the other, increasing Prussia's chances of winning the conflict. After each war, he demanded compensation from the defeated countries that expanded the territory of Prussia. The last of Bismarck's wars pitted Prussia against France, the country that Prussia had allied with only 4 years earlier to knock Austria out of contention. Here we have a painting of the signing of the unconditional surrender of France in the Palace of Versailles, where Louis XVI had lived so extravagantly some years before. Yet what you are seeing here is what followed the surrender of France, the declaration of King William I of Prussia as the new German emperor. This, in effect, was the founding of the new German nation-state. Notice that even though the image is of the crowning of the new emperor, William I is off to the left in dark blue with an orange sash across his chest. In the center of the image, however, we see Bismarck wearing white, the artist's recognition of the strong influence Bismarck had in the unification of the new Germany. And here you see another way in which Bismarck was honored. Monuments like this one in the city of Hamburg, which is at least 200 feet high, are found all over Germany even today. Even though Bismarck's unification of Germany was motivated more by Prussia's desire for political and territorial gains, he had used nationalist rhetoric to gain the support of the Germanic people, who were convinced that the physical unification of the German nation was the culmination of years of nationalist efforts to bring Germans together. However, Bismarck's manipulation of nationalist ideals also represented the strong influence these ideas had among Europeans. In fact, by the late 19th century, nationalism had gone from being an ideology to a popular sentiment. And so far, we've discussed nationalism's power to unite peoples. I now want to give you an example of how nationalism can also divide a nation. This is what is referred to as centripetal nationalism, pulling people apart. The American Civil War between 1861 and 1865, which saw the separation of 11 states from the Union, is a good example of centripetal nationalism. The yellow states on the map here declared themselves independent from the United States in 1861, kicking off a civil war that lasted 4 years and killed at least 600,000 people. The Civil War resulted from sectionalist divisions between the northern and southern states that made up the United States. Northern states were largely urban and commercial. American industry was centered largely in the north. The South, on the other hand, was still largely rural and agricultural. It was largely because of this that in the South, slavery remained legal. The northern states had abolished slavery by the early 19th century. And though slavery is not the main reason the southern states decided to separate from the Union, it represented many of the differences which existed between these two regions of the country. These differences brought into question the concept of nation among Americans. What was it to be an American? Did one support slavery or demand its abolition? The election of Abraham Lincoln to the presidency in 1860 brought the tensions between North and South to a head. Although not a radical abolitionist, Lincoln did not want to extend slavery into the western territories, where new states were emerging. Fearful of losing their influence in Washington, 11 southern states seceded from the Union in early 1861, declaring themselves the independent Confederate States of America. The new government soon became known as the Confederacy. Yet Lincoln was not ready to let the Union dissolve. A war between the two sides ensued, lasting 4 years and claiming the lives of 600,000 people. To this day, this is the deadliest war in which the U.S. has been involved. In 1863, as the northern states started to gain an advantage in the battlefield, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring free all slaves in the Confederacy, in the hopes that they would join the fight against the South. It was the first step to ending slavery in the United States. 2 years later, in 1865, the Confederacy surrendered, unable to win a war against a much better armed Northern Army. The North's industrial base had ultimately proved superior to the South's agricultural economy in financing armies. Here you see two photographs that represent the experience of the Civil War. On the left is a shot of the aftermath of the Battle of Gettysburg. Tens of thousands of men died in this decisive battle. On the right, we have a photo of freed slaves at the end of the hostilities in 1865. The end of the war brought about the official end of slavery in the United States with the signing of the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th through the 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. They ensured the freedom for all U.S. citizens and granted the vote to black men. Yet the Reconstruction period from 1865 to 1877 did not succeed in bringing the freed African Americans into the mainstream of American life. This point was made by the abolitionist activist Frederick Douglass in a powerful speech he delivered in 1865 entitled "What the Black Man Wants." The speech is one of your required readings this week, so pay close attention to the problems Douglass denounced. Ultimately, Reconstruction failed in its objectives. Slaves were free, but their representation in Southern politics was nil. The emergence of what were known as Jim Crow laws kept African Americans from participating in the democratic process. The laws were varied, but all aimed to keep African Americans from influencing the political structure in the South. An example was a law that required African Americans to take reading tests before being able to register to vote. Since African Americans were largely excluded from the educational system, few knew how to read and write. This, of course, was not a requirement for white males. This system of legal segregation created an uncomfortable sense of unity in the United States that had at its heart racist elements. Amazingly enough, Jim Crow laws were not repealed until the passing by the federal government of the Civil Rights Amendments in 1965, 100 years after the end of slavery in the United States. And so we've seen different versions of nationalism. Whether civic or ethnic, whether uniting or dividing, nationalism had become one of the most, if not the most, dominant ideology of the 19th and later 20th centuries. The success of nationalism was based on it being a modern mass movement. Modern technologies and institutions such as railroads, mass media, education, and military conscription all combined to guarantee the identification of people with some version of nationalist rhetoric that helped them feel part of a larger group, the nation. But often, nationalist movements depended on realpolitik to obtain their ideological goals. Bismarck did it for the German nationalists, Cavour for the Italians, and Lincoln helped maintain the union between the American states. Lastly, though largely ideological in its expression, nationalism inspired and continues to inspire the use of violence to obtain objectives, whether it is the unification of a new nation-state or the conquest of new lands or increased influence for an already established nation. The reasons for its success also largely explain the dangers to humanity this ideology poses. As we've seen with the American Civil War, ethnic nationalism can easily lead to discrimination and hate of those that are considered outsiders of the nation. This can easily lead to centripetal nationalism, tearing the nation apart and dissolving the political union of nation-states. As we will see next week, nationalism was also a strong driving force behind the massive European expansion into Africa and Asia in the late 19th century, establishing colonies to feed their hunger for bigger and stronger empires. This competitive element of nationalist ideology, a necessary component of differentiation, has also led to many military conflicts and wars. From World War I and World War II to the present conflicts in the Middle East, nationalist violence has remained a constant threat to peaceful cooperation between cultures. And on that slightly negative note, we end this week's lecture. So I will see you next week. Take care.